the freedom of being truly tired. We often seek happiness by striving, by achieving, by keeping pace. But perhaps the deepest, most honest peace is found not in acquisition, but in exhaustion. Tonight, as the persistent hum of the world outside fades and your awareness narrows to the dimensions of your own skin, we're going to explore the fertile, uncomfortable space between seeking and surrendering. This is not just background noise for eventual sleep. This is an invitation to confront the 21 great paradoxes of human existence, the essential contradictions that define the landscape of both happiness and suffering. We will awaken understanding even as the body prepares for rest. If striving is what grants life meaning, why is it only in true, profound fatigue, the kind that melts the armor you wear, that you feel utterly honest, utterly real with yourself? What if the most vital step toward genuine living is simply admitting you are too tired to pretend anymore? Let us begin with the first paradox, the freedom of being truly tired. Are you listening to this tonight because you are hoping for rest, or because you are completely exhausted from trying to earn it? The difference is everything. We live in an economy of energy where fatigue is viewed as a personal failure, a debt we owe the universe for not optimizing hard enough, never as a necessary natural endpoint. We treat tiredness like a symptom to be immediately medicated, caffeinated, or hacked away, dismissing it as a weakness. But there is a crucial distinction between fatigue, the simple chemical drain from physical labor, and exhaustion, the spiritual and mental surrender that strips away all artificial motivation. Exhaustion is a truth serum. Think of the mind as a vast, ancient city, constantly lit by the need to optimize, plan, and perform. Every alleyway and skyscraper is brightly illuminated by the expectation of vigilance. This relentless lighting requires effort. True, deep tiredness, however, is the moment the municipal power grid finally fails. Everything goes dark, save for the core, essential lamps, the few things that genuinely and immediately matter. All the peripheral anxieties, the emails you forgot to send 3 weeks ago, the slight social faux pas from college, the pervasive need to impress people you barely know, those anxieties suddenly lose their power source and fade. The energy needed to power those illusions is simply gone. The core paradox lies here. You spend all day fighting reality. You resist inconvenient truths. You maintain the complex facade of who you should be versus who you are right now. This psychic resistance is profoundly exhausting. When you finally reach the point of true tiredness, the cost of resistance suddenly exceeds the cost of surrender. You are too tired to argue with the truth of your situation. You are too weary to hold on to the burning resentment you nursed all afternoon. You are too fatigued to keep performing the role of the infallible achiever. The freedom you gain is not the freedom to do anything new or ambitious, but the deep, profound freedom from having to do everything you are expected to do. In modern life, we rarely allow ourselves this necessary beneficial collapse. We hover perpetually in the zone of almost tired, constantly managing our energy just enough to stay functional, but never enough to be truly honest. We fear the surrender because we worry that if we stop striving for even a moment, we will reveal some underlying hollowness, or worse, the immutable truth of our own limitations. We chase sleep like it's another achievement, yet we sabotage the quality of that rest by clinging to the narratives of the day. But it is only when the striving stops that clarity truly begins. When you are genuinely tired, the ego, that tireless, demanding taskmaster, goes mercifully silent. It cannot generate the intricate, neurotic narratives it usually spins because the cognitive energy required for sustained self-deception is temporarily depleted. In that silence, you are left with the fundamental self, the core observer, unburdened by ambition or comparison. This is the moment when the weight of the day, which felt like 1,000 urgent tasks, reveals itself to be 999 tasks you invented and only one essential requirement, just existing. You realize you don't need to be strong or clever or witty right now. You just need to be. Embrace this fatigue tonight. It is not a failure of your will. It is your temporary and necessary liberation. It is the permission slip you have been waiting for your entire life, written in the indelible ink of pure exhaustion, the ultimate freedom of being too tired to lie. The inevitable suffering that buys real peace. You crave silence, but true silence doesn't come from simply turning the volume down on the external world. It comes from confronting the noise you desperately try to avoid inside. Are you ready to admit that your current strategy of avoidance, of pushing pain aside, of postponing the reckoning, is merely borrowing future suffering at a terrifyingly high interest rate? We mistakenly believe that peace is defined purely as the absence of conflict, the vacuum left when all troubles have subsided. But genuine, lasting peace, the kind that truly anchors you against the changing tides of life, is not a destination achieved by dodging storms. It is a capacity developed only by diligently navigating them. This realization challenges the fundamental premise of modern escapism, the seductive but false promise that if we suppress enough, distract enough, or medicate enough, the foundational structures of our anxiety will simply dissolve. They won't. They never do. Consider the Japanese art of kintsugi, the delicate and deliberate practice of repairing shattered pottery with lacquer dusted or mixed with pure gold. When a vessel is broken, the repair process doesn't hide the damage. It illuminates it. The cracks become the most valuable part of the object, the historical narrative that defines the object's resilience and unique beauty. Your suffering is not something to hide or discard in shame. It is the unique golden seam line that grants your resultant peace its profound depth and irreplaceable value. Without the breaking, without the arduous process of mending, the genuine integration of the self is impossible. This brings us to the core tension. We run from suffering because our ancient survival instinct screams danger, but the suffering that truly buys peace, what we can call active suffering, is the voluntary psychological labor of processing trauma, grief, disappointment, and failure. The devastating paradox is this: passive suffering, the ceaseless misery born of resistance, denial, victimhood, and self-pity, is destructive and endless, consuming your life force perpetually. Active suffering, the intentional hard work of facing exactly what is difficult, messy, and unresolved, is agonizing in the short term, yes, but crucially, it is finite. It results in genuine resolution and deep internal restructuring. You must choose how you suffer. You cannot, under any circumstances, choose if you suffer. In a world optimized for immediate comfort and streamlined efficiency, we are culturally trained to equate discomfort with personal failure. We treat anxiety, sorrow, or deep dissatisfaction as a signal that the external environment needs fixing, not that our internal architecture needs strengthening. We chase quick fixes, spiritual bypassing, and manufactured positivity, attempting to leapfrog the necessary developmental stage of pain. This bypass creates a massive psychological debt, ensuring that the essential lesson returns later, only amplified and often delivered with far more aggression. The problems you avoid today simply become the fortified, overwhelming obstacles of tomorrow. When you finally stop fighting the feeling, when you drop the mental wrestling match and instead dedicate yourself to understanding why the feeling exists and what lesson it carries, you shift your entire relationship with reality. Suffering ceases to be a random punishment and instantly transforms into specialized, actionable data. This shift cultivates radical acceptance, not weary resignation, but the deep, quiet knowing that you possess the inherent fortitude to handle reality exactly as it presents itself, without needing to change or control it first. This inner fortitude, this proven resilience forged in the furnace of confrontation, is peace. True peace is not the absence of trouble or the smooth sailing across a glassy sea. It is the indisputable evidence of battle scars, honorably earned and skillfully mended. Go find the seam line where the gold meets the broken clay. That is where your stillness resides. Why clarity arrives only after total confusion. Have you ever spent days trying to solve a problem, a work crisis, a deep relationship dilemma, or a persistent wave of existential dread, only to find the answer not in the intensity of the struggle, but in the surrendered quiet immediately following burnout? You were chasing the answer with effort, but the answer came in the moment of letting go. This is the profound mechanism of confusion. We are conditioned to believe clarity is achieved by diligently organizing thoughts, by carefully structuring every variable, or by gathering just one more piece of crucial data. The paradox teaches us otherwise. True transformative clarity is not the result of successful organization, but the residue left after the mind has organized itself to the point of exhaustion and recognized its own failure to achieve certainty. It is the moment the internal editor, the anxious analyst within you, simply gives up the ghost. This is the saturation threshold, the psychological point where the system is too full of variables, too dense with conflicting data, to process one more input efficiently. It stops filtering and simply crashes. Think of a deep, murky pond. You want desperately to see the structure of the bottom, so you begin to stir the water furiously, believing the vigorous motion will somehow reveal the hidden terrain. But the faster you churn, the more sediment you raise from the floor. The water becomes opaque, brown, and impenetrable. The state of maximal confusion is the state of maximal effort applied. Clarity arrives only when you cease motion entirely, when the exhausted water finally settles, allowing the heavy silt, the unnecessary variables, the anxious what-ifs, and the desperate attempts at control to fall away. What you see then is not what you were striving for in the movement, but what remained in the stillness. The underlying mechanism of confusion is effort disguised as insight. When faced with a complex choice, we instinctively add more data, run more scenarios, introduce more noise. We try to force the solution through sheer willpower, but the solution isn't hidden behind the confusion. The confusion is the barrier. It is a protective layer of complexity we manufacture to avoid the terrifying simplicity of the truth. The paradox reveals that the only way to remove the barrier is to stop pushing against it. Confusion is the state of maximum potential energy. Clarity is the state of total cognitive drain. In our hyper-connected modern lives, we constantly exist in a state of pre-clarity confusion. We use search engines to answer every doubt, thinking that continuous information acquisition is the undisputed path to certainty. But certainty is often just a simplified narrative built on the ruins of exhausted doubt. We must allow the doubt, the confusion, to fully play itself out. Do not run from it, but dive into it until you realize you are completely submerged and the complexity is suffocating, forcing the upward retreat into simplicity. This realization shifts your relationship with anxiety. Confusion stops being a signal of personal failure and transforms into a necessary precursor, a required stage of incubation. When you are truly, totally lost, when the map has failed, the GPS is dead, and the coordinates are meaningless, you stop worrying about which path is the best and simply start walking in a direction you can sustain. You realize that insight is not a prize that is discovered through diligent search. It is a permission that is allowed once the searching has ceased. You must trust the process of saturation, the period where the mind must attempt every possible permutation before it is finally satisfied enough to rest. True solutions are often not elegant answers, but just the last option standing after everything complicated has been dismissed by exhaustion. Stop seeking clarity. Start seeking sufficient exhaustion. The clearest water is always found at the bottom of the deepest well, precisely after everything heavy has finally settled. Few arrive here awake. Leave your mark with a like. It helps this reflection reach others who seek truth before sleep. The curse of knowing your own happiness. Have you ever been suspended in a moment so perfect, so complete, that you instinctively knew this is happiness? And in that precise instant, the feeling started to change, started to soften at the edges, slowly retreating back into the distance. We are driven by the search for happiness, yet we are simultaneously cursed by our capacity to observe it. What if the identification of joy is the first step toward its eventual dissolution? This is the paradox of reflective happiness, the subtle curse of knowing when you have reached your destination. True, effortless joy exists entirely in the current unconscious state. It is a seamless experience, a complete immersion in the now. But we are reflective beings tethered to our own self-awareness. We possess the unique and often destructive ability to pull the feeling out of the stream of time, holding it up to the critical light of analysis. We ask the fatal question, is this it? Is this the peak? The instant that question is formulated, the pure experience shifts. It ceases to be an unquantifiable state of being and becomes a measurable and therefore highly vulnerable object. Imagine you are driving at dusk. The windows are down, the air is cool but not cold, and the radio settles onto a song that feels perfectly suited to the landscape unfolding before you. You feel an immense, perfect tranquility. You are aligned. This moment is utterly right. Then, a voice in the deepest, most analytical chamber of your mind whispers, remember this exact feeling. You are happy right now. The spell, so powerful just a second ago, breaks. The observation is the contaminant. The underlying mechanism here is the immediate jump from the present state to the future consequence. When you identify happiness, your mind, operating on the principle of impermanence, instantly introduces the shadow of inevitable loss. Happiness becomes framed not by its inherent quality, but by its duration. You shift fundamentally from being happy to monitoring happiness. You become a scientist observing a fragile specimen, desperate not to disrupt the ecosystem, but, by nature of your presence, you already have. This monitoring introduces tension, the anxiety of maintenance, the frantic internal desire to freeze time, which is the antithesis of the flow state required for joy. We are cursed in this way by the very memories we value and the anticipations we dread. We attempt to curate happiness in our modern lives with increasing desperation. We take the picture, we post the moment, we document the experience, trying to capture the feeling so we can reliably find our way back to it. Yet, the intense effort dedicated to externalizing and maximizing the present joy often succeeds only in minimizing the internal presence of that joy. By trying to capture the wave, we remove the water from the sea. The deepest philosophical implication of this paradox is that we must recognize that the most profound experiences are those we cannot fully articulate or categorize in the moment they occur. The wisdom necessary for a peaceful life lies in allowing happiness to exist as a background hum, not a spotlight. The moment we try to shine the light directly on it, we risk burning the scene away. It forces us to confront our fundamental control fetish, the stubborn belief that what we understand, we can retain. Perhaps true, lasting peace isn't something you possess or identify. It is found not in defining the perfect state, but in the quiet, unexamined surrender to the state itself. The deepest happiness is that which you simply forget you are experiencing, allowing it to move through you like unobserved air. The burden of unfettered self-acceptance. We arrive now at paradox number 5, the burden of unfettered self-acceptance. It sounds like the ultimate psychological liberation, doesn't it? The final cessation of self-conflict, the promised land where all internal criticism is silenced. But what if the very peace you seek through total, unconditional acceptance is built upon a foundation that ultimately denies you the vitality of evolution? What if accepting everything you currently are means forever halting the process of becoming something more? What if the elimination of inner tension is also the elimination of the engine that drives aspiration? Think about the quiet, persistent voice in your mind that tells you, you must love all your flaws equally. You strive for a philosophical neutrality where the messy, ambitious, and slightly disappointing parts of you are smoothed over by the blanket of affirmation. But have you ever noticed the deep, unsettling stillness that sometimes follows that total acceptance? We confuse resignation with peace. We treat ambition as a flaw to be healed, rather than a necessary symptom of a soul still seeking its potential. Is that stillness freedom, or is it merely the quiet of an engine that has voluntarily run out of fuel because it decided the current parking spot was acceptable? True self-acceptance is the recognition of your current state, free from self-contempt, allowing you to move forward without the paralysis of guilt. The burden arises when this recognition is distorted into active endorsement, a commitment to inertia disguised as psychological health. This is not about healthy boundaries. This is about eliminating internal friction entirely. We confuse the necessary kindness toward our failings with the premature celebration of them. We mistake the pause button for the finish line, believing that stopping the self-improvement cycle is the highest form of self-care, when in reality, it is a retreat from the hard work of actualization. Imagine a perfectly soundproof, climate-controlled room. Inside, you are guaranteed safety, comfort, and absolute non-judgment. This is the psychological space of total, unfettered self-acceptance. Nothing can challenge you here. Nothing can make you feel bad about your present capabilities. But nothing can surprise you either. Nothing forces you to lean into the discomfort of change or the vulnerability of reaching. The room is so optimized for your current state that it requires no input, no effort, and demands no emergence. You are perfectly calibrated to a closed system, a self-referential loop of affirmation. The question then becomes, if the environment demands nothing of you, and you demand nothing of yourself, what compels you to become anything more than you are right now? The mechanism of the paradox is simple. Growth requires tension. True fulfillment is almost always found in the productive gap between who you are and who you feel compelled to be. When you completely dismantle that gap through radical philosophical acceptance, you eliminate the very engine of aspiration. You have psychologically removed the friction required to generate heat and consequently to forge new strength. The self you accept today becomes the self you are permanently bound to tomorrow. The acceptance meant to free you becomes the most sophisticated form of behavioral limiting. It's the highest paradox of the self-help era, the pursuit of zero inner conflict inevitably leading to zero inner evolution. In our hyper-validated, digitally affirmed world, we are constantly told that any feeling of inadequacy is inherently pathological, something to be instantly managed or accepted away. We are taught to retreat from the discomfort of accountability into the safety of affirmation. We begin to use self-acceptance as an armor against any form of constructive feedback, internal or external, labeling promptings for change as simply non-acceptance by the self or others. This is not resilience, it's insulation. It's the modern refusal to engage in the necessary, painful negotiation required to move from the comfort zone toward the meaning zone, where risk and vulnerability reign supreme. The philosophical cost of this unfettered acceptance is the slow, creeping loss of vitality. We mistake the temporary tranquility of surrender for genuine, lasting peace. Without the subtle, internal dissatisfaction that propels us, the quiet belief that we owe the world or ourselves something better, we risk settling into a life of comfortable mediocrity that later curdles into regret. The soul requires the sting of imperfection, the awareness of distance between the ideal and the real, to generate the energy needed for the journey. When you become too comfortable being exactly who you are, you lose the magnetic driving force that pushes you toward the discovery of who you might be. Perhaps the deepest form of self-love is not the blanket acceptance of the self in its current state, but the persistent demand that the self must strive for its own better nature. True freedom is found not in eliminating the space between the current you and the future you, but in honoring that distance and accepting the beautiful, essential tension it creates. The acceptance of imperfection must always coexist with the fierce, unyielding intent to transcend it. The necessity of loss for authentic appreciation. When was the last time you truly felt the warmth of your own home, not just registered its existence? Is true appreciation a stable state of mind, or is it merely the echo of something that was almost taken away? We often mistake appreciation for passive acceptance, believing that if we simply acquire enough good things, our feeling of gratitude will multiply accordingly. But experience proves the opposite. This is the sixth paradox, the necessity of loss for authentic appreciation. We pursue perpetual stability, financial, emotional, relational. We crave the permanent zero-risk state where comfort is guaranteed. Yet, the moment we achieve this static permanence, a profound shadow descends, not of sadness, but of chronic numbness. We stop seeing the value of things that are always present. Loss, in this context, is not just death or tragedy. It is the simple, inevitable absence of a desired state, or the memory of past deprivation. Its necessity lies in acting as the boundary marker. You cannot define the light without knowing intimately where the shadow begins. Imagine a world where the sun never sets, a landscape bathed in eternal, unyielding noon. Initially, this sounds like paradise. No more darkness, no cold, limitless light. But after the first week, the very concept of day would evaporate. You would lose the sacred, restorative power of night. You would lose the exquisite, fleeting beauty of the final moments of twilight. The constant, unchanging presence of light cheapens its value until it becomes an environmental hum, unnoticed, unappreciated. The loss of darkness is the loss of the capacity to truly perceive and celebrate the light. The mechanism behind this paradox is rooted in neurological contrast, often called hedonic adaptation. Your brain is not wired to process absolute states. It processes change. A massive surge of neurochemical reward occurs when a positive state replaces a negative one. Relief after tension, warmth after cold, satiety after hunger. If the positive state never changes, the contrast fades. You stop tasting the coffee when you drink it 24 hours a day. The fear of absence, the quiet whisper that this will not last, is the essential spice that converts mere existence into lived experience. We spend our lives building comprehensive walls against finitude and insecurity, but it is precisely the finite nature of joy that grants it altitude. If you truly believed your partner would live for 1,000 years without suffering, would you hold their hand with the same immediate, profound urgency you feel today? The potential loss elevates the mundane into the sacred. It is the awareness of the clock winding down, however slowly, that forces you to be present and to savor the texture of the now. In modern life, we struggle desperately to eliminate friction and ensure constant comfort. We curate perfect, endless feeds of stimulation designed to prevent any momentary lack. But the pursuit of continuous high-level enjoyment is fundamentally self-defeating. It breeds a subtle, chronic dissatisfaction, the inability to feel the simple, clean relief of a single good thing, because the menu of excellent things is infinite and always available. You lose appreciation for the silence because the option of noise is always ready. You are numb because you have successfully quarantined yourself from the very possibility of need, and therefore, from the profound pleasure of having that need met. Accepting the necessity of loss is the moment you transition from a consumer of happiness to an authentic appreciator of existence. It transforms time from a measurable, infinite commodity into a precious, finite resource. This paradox teaches you that the suffering or the absence is not an obstacle to the appreciation, but the silent, foundational prerequisite for it. It recontextualizes grief, not as a meaningless void, but as the unavoidable tax paid for having loved something fully and allowed it to reside within your reality. Stop trying to build a life without shadows. The deepest appreciation is not found in permanence, but in savoring the moment precisely because you know, undeniably, that it will become a memory, and then eventually an absence. Cherish the fleeting. That is where the light truly burns. The weightless feeling of carrying the full truth. Have you ever considered that the heaviest things you carry aren't the mistakes you've made, but the necessary continuous labor required to remember the lies you told about them? This is the central, exhausting paradox of existence. We spend our vitality managing the shadows, fearful that if we fully step into the light of our own complete reality, we will crumble. We often perceive truth as a finite, sometimes painful commodity, a little truth here, a little more there, dispensed carefully. But there is an inflection point, a psychological threshold, where the sheer volume of acknowledged reality transforms the perception of the burden itself. This is what we call saturated honesty, not merely confession, but the total and calm integration of all known complexities, contradictions, and inherent flaws within your personal narrative. It is the precise moment you stop negotiating with reality, internal or external, and simply yield to the architecture of what is. Imagine you are standing in a vast, cold, dimly lit museum dedicated entirely to you. Every decision, every hidden thought, every failure, every moment of genuine brilliance is laid bare, indexed, and illuminated under harsh spotlights. For years, you have spent your energy trying to close off certain wings, hanging heavy velvet ropes across the entrances, and paying a small, continuous psychological toll to the watchful guards, your defense mechanisms. You believe the contents of certain rooms are too shameful, too frightening, too contradictory to face simultaneously. You are exhausted by the ongoing maintenance. One evening, you simply throw open every single door. You walk through the entire structure, acknowledging the beauty and the ugliness, the success and the profound ineptitude, with equal, unwavering measure. The paradox is this: the light you allow in doesn't reveal a new, paralyzing shame. It reveals the crushing, relentless energy that was spent maintaining the dark, fighting the flow, and resisting reality. The building doesn't collapse. It stands, sturdy and real, suddenly less frightening because it is finally known in its entirety. Why does this comprehensive reckoning result in a strange weightlessness? Because deceit, especially self-deceit, is an active, high-cost expenditure of cognitive resources. It requires continuous editing, projection, and the maintenance of a fabricated chronology that must be constantly updated. Lying, even by silent omission, is profoundly heavy labor. It is the friction of resisting gravity. When you finally choose to embrace the full, unfiltered truth, the truth that you are flawed, often afraid, occasionally reactive, and simultaneously capable of profound love and unpredictable genius, you stop spending vital energy fighting the ghost of who you think you should be. The weight disappears not because the facts of your life are suddenly lighter, but because the effort of resistance has utterly ceased. The focus shifts instantaneously from covering up to simply living through the reality that is already present. In our fragmented modern existence, we are constantly crafting versions of ourselves for different audiences: social media, the workplace, our intimate partners. We curate heavily, agonizing over the crop, the filter, and the performance of effortlessness. This curation is the subtle, pervasive burden. When the full truth of your financial insecurity, or your deep, aching dissatisfaction with your career, or the true fragility of your long-term relationship is finally admitted, even just internally, the initial shock is painful. But the secondary, liberating effect is the cessation of the performance. The weight you felt was never the problem itself. The weight was the performance of not having that problem. When you finally drop the mask you've held up for years, the weightless air rushes back into your lungs. This concept of saturated honesty is intrinsically linked to radical, unforgiving self-acceptance. The philosophical shift here is the move from morality, a continuous judgment of what is right and wrong, to ecology, a simple, non-judgmental acceptance of what simply is. By accepting the totality of yourself, the shadow and the light, you gain a strange, cold, unshakable authority. You become psychologically unblackmailable by your own past. When there are truly no secrets left to keep from yourself, there is nothing left to fear about future exposure. That security, that freedom from the desperate need to hide, is the ultimate weightless feeling. It is the solid granite ground finally found at the bottom of the deepest, darkest abyss. The full truth is not a feather, but the total absence of self-inflicted friction allows you to float. You were never meant to carry the unbearable shame of your existence, only the complete, calm awareness of it, and awareness, when truly saturated and integrated, is paradoxically light. How proximity dulls the intensity of joy. The eighth paradox asks you to consider the slow, silent erosion of delight caused not by loss, but by sheer proximity. It is the insidious truth that everything you hold close eventually loses its voltage, not through decay, but through constant contact. Think of the most profound moment of happiness you ever achieved. The peak experience, the feeling that nothing could ever surpass this clarity. Now ask yourself, if you could repeat that moment daily, or even hourly, how long would it take for the miraculous to become merely routine? You often find yourself chasing something fiercely, a specific comfort, a person, a state of being, only to realize the real suffering begins the moment you finally catch it and refuse to introduce distance. This is the central friction of contentment. We crave ownership, security, and permanence, believing that removing distance guarantees lasting satisfaction. Yet the physics of pleasure dictate that desire requires space to breathe. Joy is defined not by its duration, but by its contrast to its absence. When the object of your desire is constantly within reach, the perfect relationship, the flawless house, the uninterrupted comfort, the emotional system recalibrates. The baseline shifts, and what was once extraordinary morphs inevitably into the expected. Imagine living inside a perfectly tuned symphony hall, where the most exquisite music plays continuously, 24 hours a day. Initially, it is transcendence. The complex harmonies reshape your soul. You feel alive in every note. But soon, the very quality that made it sublime, its omnipresence, becomes its curse. The sound stops being music and becomes atmosphere, indistinguishable from the background hum of the refrigerator or the persistent whisper of the air conditioning. To hear the music again, truly hear it, you must step outside and experience silence, separation, and longing. You need the memory of absence to define the boundary of presence. The paradox lies in the mechanism of perception. Your brain is a brilliant, ruthless economist. It doesn't celebrate fixed assets, it only registers change and contrast. A 10-degree increase in temperature is only profoundly noticeable if the starting point was freezing cold. If the starting point is already 95 degrees, that 10-degree climb is barely registered, or often perceived as an unbearable spike. When joy is constant, the neural pathways stop firing the novelty signal. You are happy, yes, but you are experiencing the equivalent of white noise joy, a static, unfelt frequency of low-grade comfort. The tension is realizing that to feel the intensity of happiness, you must implicitly accept the risk of its momentary withdrawal, its strategic removal from your grasp. We see this tension mirrored everywhere in the digital age. We have placed every source of novelty and comfort, food, entertainment, connection, status updates, within 2 clicks or 5 feet of our bodies. We have engineered separation out of existence, and in doing so, we have simultaneously engineered intensity out of existence. The curated life, where every moment is documented, every need is instantly met, and every comfort is guaranteed, is a life specifically designed to exhaust the human capacity for profound appreciation. You are not unhappy in the traditional sense. You are just emotionally saturated, suffering from a chronic condition of proximity fatigue. The deeper psychological impact is the forced shift from appreciation to expectation. When you remove distance, you remove the necessity of effort, of anticipation, and of conscious gratitude. The realization that alters your perspective is this: true, potent joy requires space, the deliberate establishment of a frontier between you and the thing you value. You must allow for brief periods of fasting from your pleasure, whether it be scheduled time away from a beloved partner, a chosen week of technological silence, or a temporary abstinence from a favorite food or activity. This is not self-denial. It is the strategic maintenance of desire's keenest edge. You are deliberately making room for the return of the exceptional, preventing the precious from becoming the mundane. Understand that the greatest threat to enduring happiness is not external hardship, but the suffocating, relentless closeness of what you have already won. To preserve the sweetness of the fruit, you must occasionally let the branch sway far from your reach. For the fire of delight to burn bright, it needs not just fuel, but the surrounding cold air of absence. 9. The quiet violence of perpetual self-improvement. You are always told to optimize, to level up, to leverage your potential, but have you ever paused long enough to notice that the goalpost only ever moves further away? You subscribe to the newsletters, you buy the planners, you download the productivity apps, all in the desperate hope of finally arriving at the destination where the effort stops, the optimized self. But that destination is a cruel illusion. This is the paradoxical suffering inherent in the mandate of perpetual self-improvement. This is a psychological mechanism where your current self is deemed inherently flawed, simply because a better, more efficient version of you exists in the future. We are taught to view ourselves not as dynamic organisms, but as products subject to endless iteration, mandatory patches, and performance reviews. Self-improvement ceases to be an optional path towards growth and becomes a moral obligation, fueled by the societal fear of stagnation. If you are not actively improving, you are deteriorating. This imperative treats the self as a deficient object that must be constantly fixed, forcing you to develop an adversarial relationship with the person you are right now. Imagine the optimization treadmill. You are running faster than you ever have, generating immense friction, sweating out anxiety, and building impressive muscle mass. But your geographic location never changes. Relative to the fixed backdrop of the room, the steady peace of your actual life, you remain static. The treadmill defines your effort as movement, but it fundamentally prohibits arrival. This relentless, internal striving makes the current moment nothing more than a pit stop before the next demanding upgrade. The mechanism thrives on scarcity and shame. By constantly focusing on what you lack, the discipline, the perfect morning routine, the elusive optimal flow state, you ensure that contentment remains perpetually out of reach. Every step forward in improvement is simultaneously a condemnation of the person you were yesterday. The joy of a minor success is immediately hijacked by the pressure of the next, larger deficiency waiting to be addressed. The industry of optimization successfully externalizes your internal critic, turning your deepest desires for peace into actionable items that guarantee perpetual hustle. This is the quiet violence, the internal refusal to grant yourself amnesty. Treating your body and mind as disposable tools for future profit. Look around your modern life. Your phone tracks your steps, your sleep, your focus hours, your heart rate variability. Every metric intended to provide data subtly operates as a silent judgment. Did you hit 10,000 steps? If not, you failed to maximize your potential. Did you get 8 full hours of deep REM sleep? If not, you are performing below standard. These systems turn the qualitative journey of human experience into a quantifiable performance review that you perpetually fail to ace. You become trapped in a self-monitoring prison, constantly cross-referencing your reality against the optimized algorithm. The deep psychological wound here is the internalized belief that rest is synonymous with regression, and that intrinsic worth is subservient to performance-based value. You internalize the corrosive idea that you are only valuable when you are doing or becoming something better, not simply being. This perpetual striving starves the one thing the optimization was supposed to provide: acceptance. You learn to hate the you that isn't producing, resting, or striving hard enough, ensuring that true, sustaining happiness remains forever contingent upon the next impossible achievement. We forget that perhaps the most radical act of self-improvement is realizing there is nothing left to fix. The tragedy of the optimized life is that we spend our entire existence trying to arrive at a destination we occupied all along, running ourselves ragged on the treadmill in the pursuit of the very stillness we were too afraid to embrace. The quiet violence ends the moment you decide that the current iteration of the self is, finally and completely, enough. The failure inherent in seeking perfection. Have you ever noticed that the pursuit of flawlessness rarely results in peace, but instead creates an infinite loop of frantic self-correction? We chase a summit that, once reached, reveals itself to be nothing more than a higher plateau demanding more effort, more vigilance, and ultimately more suffering. Perfection is defined as the state of being complete and correct in every way. But completeness is the enemy of movement. To be complete is to be finished. And if you are finished, where's the space for growth, for surprise, for the chaotic emergence that defines a living system? We do not simply seek excellence, we seek a kind of immortal static beauty, a museum piece that can never truly exist in the constant frictional flow of time. This ideal state is a ghost, haunting the halls of your actual life. Imagine two objects. The first is a flawlessly carved marble statue, smooth, detailed, eternal, incapable of movement. The second is a turbulent, flowing river. The statue is perfect yet inert. It cannot adapt. A single crack ruins its integrity forever. The river is constantly and necessarily imperfect, muddy, fast, slow, shallow, deep, ever-changing, yet it is alive. Its imperfection is its inherent strength, its ability to reform, erode, carry, and persist. Which object do you model your life after? Most of us strive to become the perfect, unmoving statue, forgetting that we are fundamentally made of water. The profound paradox is rooted in the difference between mastery and perfection. Mastery is a direction, a lifelong curve of incremental improvement fueled by curiosity, humility, and the acceptance of mistake. Perfection is a destination, a fixed point driven by the fear of being seen as insufficient. When you seek perfection, you are not striving for an ideal state. You are attempting to eliminate the possibility of external judgment, preemptively silencing the inner critic. But the moment you elevate perfection as the standard, you set yourself up for absolute failure. The loudest judge, you soon discover, lives inside you. Every tiny deviation from the imagined flawless ideal becomes a catastrophic personal failure. The gap between your perfect image and your messy, beautiful, real reality doesn't shrink. It widens with every failed attempt to control the unpredictable nature of existence. In the age of constant curation and display, this chase for the perfect image, the perfect career, the perfect relationship, the perfectly optimized self, has become a form of societal self-torture. We present polished surfaces to the world, knowing full well the structural compromises and hidden anxieties underneath. The stress you feel is not primarily in the effort, but in maintaining the facade of having arrived at a non-existent, static endpoint. When your overriding goal is perfection, you forfeit the intrinsic joy of the process, because the process, by definition, requires mistakes, iteration, and occasional ugliness. You are trading the vitality of learning for the paralyzing rigidity of needing to be eternally right. What changes within you is the realization that true quality and durable happiness are found not at the elusive peak of perfection, but in the spaciousness and breathing room of good enough. It is the fundamental acknowledgement that finished is rarely perfect, and perfect is rarely finished. The philosophical liberation begins when you start to value robustness and resilience over flawlessness. The strongest structures, the deepest relationships, and the most meaningful lives are the ones that have absorbed damage, adapted, and shown their seams, not the ones that have never been tested by reality. The greatest failure is not the mistake itself, but the debilitating paralysis caused by waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect skill, or the perfect self to emerge. Stop demanding static immortality from a life designed for beautiful, inevitable decay. The crack is always where the light enters. What if the most profound fulfillment is simply the willingness to be exquisitely, fundamentally incomplete? Halfway. If you're still awake, it means you were meant to be here. Subscribe and keep walking this quiet path with us. The strength discovered through complete surrender, the paradox of the iron gate. You spend years pushing against the iron gate of circumstance. You try to force it, to manipulate the stubborn metal with pure willpower and frantic energy, certain that true strength lies only in the application of resistance. But the gate, which represents the unchangeable facts of the present moment, the grief, the economic reality, the past mistake, the illness, does not yield. You are left exhausted, demoralized, defining your suffering by the immense amount of energy you invest in fighting the very thing that simply is. And then comes the moment of profound exhaustion, the point where you simply run out of momentum. This is the critical juncture where many mistake surrender for resignation. But they are radically different states. Resignation is the passive acceptance of defeat, the decision that nothing matters and the body should just lie down and wait. Surrender, in the context of psychological paradox, is an active choice, the tactical, counterintuitive decision to stop spending internal resources fighting an external reality that cannot be immediately altered. It is the moment you drop your shoulder, step back from the massive gate, and instead of pushing, look calmly for the latch you could not see while your eyes were clouded by effort. Imagine you are caught in a deep, powerful riptide. Every primal survival instinct screams at you. Thrash, swim parallel, fight the current with every muscle fiber you possess. This is the understandable but ultimately fatal strategy. The ocean is stronger, and fighting only guarantees exhaustion and eventual drowning. The true, terrifyingly effective strategy is to cease the fight, to deliberately allow the current to carry you slightly further out, conserving your energy, floating, breathing deep, and waiting for the moment when the current naturally weakens. Your life is saved not by your power over the water, but by your tactical surrender to the force you couldn't overcome, allowing your energy to be redirected toward survival rather than resistance. The mechanism of prolonged suffering is often the relentless internal declaration of no. We say no to the way things are, no to the past events that shaped us, no to the pain that defines the current hour. This internal resistance creates a double bind. You suffer the external event, and then you suffer the exhausting internal conflict created by your absolute refusal to acknowledge the event. You are waging war on two fronts, the external reality and your internal interpretation of that reality. Surrender is the revolutionary quiet moment when you whisper, yes, this is happening now, this pain is present, this circumstance is real. That singular, radical yes does not erase the pain, but it instantaneously collapses the distance between you and reality. The tension doesn't vanish, but the internal war over the tension stops. A profound strength appears, born from stillness, because you are no longer spending half your psychological vitality fighting yourself about what you cannot control. The power you regain is not the power to change the situation immediately, but the maximized power to navigate it wisely from a position of radical clarity. Consider chronic anxiety or intrusive thoughts. You fight them, you try to suppress them, push them out of your mind, but every ounce of force you use gives those thoughts more definition, more power, more reason to return. You are stuck in a mental tug-of-war. The paradox states that the only way to win a tug-of-war is to drop the rope, to acknowledge the anxiety. I am anxious right now. This feeling is real, but it is temporary. I do not need to fix it or fight it, is to surrender to the uncomfortable reality of the present moment. This movement, from resisting the moment to embracing it fully, is the core foundation of genuine, unbreakable resilience. The ultimate paradox of psychological strength is that it demands radical vulnerability. You cannot be truly strong while maintaining the exhausting facade of absolute control. When you completely surrender the frantic need to control the outcome, you gain maximum control over the process, over your response, and over the integrity of your own actions. This is the difference between a brittle shield, which will break under predictable pressure, and flowing water, which absorbs the shock and continues its path. Surrender is not failure. It is the realignment of your effort with reality, ensuring that every ounce of energy is directed towards constructive adaptation rather than futile battle. The ultimate strength is found in the softest acceptance. You drop the shield only to discover you have become the mountain. The pain that defines the boundaries of self. You spend your life trying to soften the world, cushioning the blows. We invest in layers of comfort, seeking a state of effortless flow where our identity merges seamlessly with the pleasant rhythm of existence. But what if those impacts you dread aren't meant to destroy you, but instead are the only force capable of drawing your true outline? Have you ever noticed that the moment the world hurts you the most is often the precise moment you feel most definitively you? This isn't about indulging pain, it is about acknowledging its existential precision. The self, or the ego, loves comfort because comfort is seamless. It allows the mind to float, undefined, blending back into the environment of ease. But suffering is an instant demarcation line. It is the friction necessary to prove your singularity. The moment a deep loss occurs, or a trusted relationship is shattered, or intense failure strikes, that surge of suffering is the clearest, most undeniable evidence that you are localized, distinct, and vulnerable, a separate entity capable of being wounded. Think of the self not as a polished diamond, but as an undeveloped photograph, a blank sheet floating in the warm, comfortable developer fluid of routine. The image is inherently there, the potential of your form exists, but you cannot see the specifics. Pain, in this analogy, is the concentrated chemical splash, the fixer. It instantly arrests the developing process and reveals the hard, specific lines of your current state. Without that sudden, harsh fixer, the image would eventually fade back into the blur of potential. Pain fixes your current form, solidifying the emotional and psychological architecture you inhabit right now, preventing your boundaries from bleeding out into the background noise. The paradox inherent in this mechanism is that we desperately strive for happiness, which we often define as a completely borderless state of non-resistance. We want a life where our will and the universe's will are identical. But when we achieve that, we risk dissolution, the edges soften, and we begin to forget who we are independent of our benign circumstances. Conversely, suffering is aggressive boundary setting. It demands answers. Where did the world infringe? What specific part of you was violated or threatened? The answers to those questions form the most accurate map you will ever draw of your selfhood. You define your personal creed not by what you accept easily, but by the lines you will not tolerate being crossed, by what you absolutely refuse to allow the world to take from you. In the modern landscape of pervasive self-optimization and constant emotional management, we have created elaborate shields, digital distractions, pharmacological aids, psychological frameworks, designed explicitly to prevent the painful definition process. We are terrified of sharp edges. But the unavoidable side effect of perpetually avoiding the boundary experience is becoming amorphous. If you never let the world push back, if you never submit to genuine internal struggle, how do you truly know how much weight you can bear? The fear of pain is often mistaken for the fear of destruction. In reality, it is often the fear of discovering your own limitations, which are, ironically, the foundational architecture of your strength. To integrate this understanding is to stop viewing inevitable suffering as a cosmic error or a sign of personal failure, and to begin seeing it as an existential anchoring system. The deeper the scar, the more specifically defined the remaining self becomes. The scar is not just evidence of damage, it is enduring proof of survival and specificity. It is the existential anchor point that allows you to say, with undeniable certainty, "This happened to me. I am separate from that force and I endured it." This realization provides a strange, quiet, and profound dignity, the dignity of having a defined, known location in a chaotic and indefinite universe. So, perhaps the truest definition of self is not found in the comfortable, quiet moments of peace, but forged in the high-pressure echoes of impact. Stop running from the boundaries. Let the world press hard enough to show you exactly where you stand, and then simply hold that line. You are most fundamentally you when you are actively defining yourself against the forces that seek to absorb or erase you. The liberation found only within strict limits. We are constantly sold the idea of boundless expansion, the absolute zero-gravity freedom to choose anything, to be anyone at any moment. This is the paradox of the constrained vessel. We chase infinite possibility, yet why does that freedom often feel like exhaustion? Why does true, quiet peace tend to arrive when the options finally dwindle? we must ask, what if the most liberating choice you could possibly make is to choose less? What if the true path to freedom requires the construction of strict, often self-imposed limits? This concept stands in direct challenge to the modern dogma of optimization and maximalization. We are relentlessly instructed to keep all doors open, to maintain optionality, to never limit our potential. But true liberation, as understood by Stoic philosophers and modern behavioral scientists alike, isn't about the sheer breadth of your landscape. It's about the deliberate, intentional depth of your focus. It suggests that by willingly accepting certain constraints, temporal boundaries, behavioral routines, strict definitions of purpose, we free up the cognitive energy currently consumed by endless decision-making and the anxiety of potential regret. It's the voluntary narrowing of scope that prevents the debilitating paralysis of infinite choice. Consider the metaphor of the river. Its purpose, its power, its very essence of movement is defined entirely by the banks that confine it. Without those limits, the water spreads thin, losing all current, all velocity. It becomes a stagnant swamp, wide, shallow, and directionless. The boundary is not the enemy of the river. The boundary is what generates the movement, the momentum, and the eventual arrival at the intended destination. Your life is that river. Are you a powerful, focused current defined by solid, chosen banks, or a wide, shallow mire of uncommitted potential? The mechanism at play here is a crucial trade-off between potential energy and kinetic energy. Unconstrained freedom is pure potential, a vast, beautiful, but ultimately inert cloud of maybe. But you cannot live in maybe. To act, to create meaning, and to generate genuine flow, you must sacrifice that potential by choosing a path and building the surrounding walls. The suffering inherent in this paradox is the deep-seated fear of commitment. We fear closing any single door because we harbor the irrational belief that the absolute best possibility is always hidden just beyond the commitment line. But if you never close a door, you never commit to building a foundation within the room you've chosen. If every option is available, no option carries true significance. Observe this mechanism in your daily life, specifically in your relationship with digital infinity. An unrestricted internet connection offers every piece of knowledge, every potential distraction, every emotional escape. True liberation here isn't throwing the device away, it's installing focused restrictions, timers, specific modes, intentional friction points that make distraction slightly harder than intention. You are not suppressing the desire for distraction. You are architecting a system that forces your cognitive default toward productivity and presence. This constraint generates immediate urgency and efficiency. The person who sets a strict 9 p.m. cutoff for work is almost always the person who accomplishes more and better quality work between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. because the limit defines the reality of the available resources. This perspective radically redefines discipline. Discipline is not punishment. It is the ultimate act of self-care and self-respect. It's a philosophical acknowledgement that the human mind suffers terribly under the tyranny of the void and thrives on tangible structure. By creating strict limits, you minimize the psychological burden of executive function, freeing the higher self to engage in deep work or true unburdened presence, rather than constantly policing boundaries or scrolling through a boundless menu of choices. You trade the superficial, exhausting freedom of being able to do anything for the profound, sustaining freedom of doing what matters exceptionally well. Freedom, then, is not the absence of walls, but the hard-won, beautiful ability to dance powerfully and intentionally within the precise boundaries you consciously choose to build. Let the self-imposed banks define the enduring power of your flow. The trap of perpetual, unconditional love. We arrive now at Paradox 14, the trap of perpetual, unconditional love. It sounds like the ultimate sanctuary, doesn't it? The perfect safety net stretched beneath every mistake, every failure, every moment of weakness. But what if the net is so strong, so soft, that it catches you and holds you suspended, preventing you from ever learning to stand on your own 2 feet? What if the constant guarantee of acceptance becomes the primary obstacle to your necessary evolution? Think for a moment about the most secure love you've ever known, the kind that asks nothing back, the kind that forgives before the mistake is even made. Do you feel only liberation, or is there a faint, subtle pressure accompanying that certainty, a pressure to remain exactly as you are, forever contained within that perfect acceptance, never needing to venture into the painful territory of self-improvement? Unconditional love, in its purest, idealized form, is the philosophical summit of human attachment, a promise of non-judgment, a constant supply of grace. It is the love of the divine, or perhaps the primal attachment a parent has for an infant. But when we attempt to transfer this abstract ideal into the context of two conscious, developing adults, it quickly warps. It shifts from being a powerful foundation of emotional safety into a low, restrictive ceiling of potential. Imagine living in a scientifically perfect environment, a simulation where the temperature is always exactly 72 degrees, the humidity precisely balanced, and sustenance always provided, regardless of whether you move, work, or even think. You are completely safe, perpetually comfortable. In the short term, this is defined as paradise. In the long term, however, your internal mechanisms atrophy. Your ability to self-regulate heat fades. Your muscles weaken because they are never required to bear a true load. You stop needing to adapt. You become perfectly preserved, yet profoundly static. This is the central engine of the paradox. Perpetual unconditional acceptance removes the necessity of friction, and friction psychologically is where definition and growth happen. When you know absolutely that nothing you do, no failure, no moment of complacency, no relational slight can ever truly reduce the love directed towards you. What is the internal motivation to strive for goodness or even self-respect? The loved one is robbed of the vital, painful feedback loop that pushes them toward accountability and maturity. They learn that being acceptable is completely independent of being admirable. And what about the giver? The giver of perpetual unconditional love often turns into a subtle martyr, sacrificing their own necessary boundaries in the name of devotion. They transform intimacy into a form of servitude, confusing endless endurance with true commitment. They are trapped in the role of the infinite provider, ensuring the recipient never needs to face the consequences of their own choices. In modern relationships, the insistence on total, unending, unconditional love often becomes a subtle demand for permission to remain immature, irresponsible, or unaccountable. It weaponizes acceptance. We confuse unconditional acceptance of a person's existence, which should be standard, with unconditional acceptance of their behavior, which is corrosive. True mature love is not merely unconditional, it is fiercely discerning. It says, I love you wholly, I value your soul, but I cannot and will not enable you perpetually. I accept who you are, but my respect and my engagement are conditionally tied to your effort to become the best version of yourself. The core psychological injury of this trap is the removal of earned value. When everything is guaranteed, nothing is truly valued. If your partner's love requires no effort, no cultivation, and no maintenance, you inevitably begin to suspect that anyone could earn it, or perhaps that the love itself holds little weight because its bar of entry is zero. You lose the satisfying tension between personal autonomy and mutual connection, the crucial dynamic that makes a bond vibrant rather than dormant. You become less of a partner and more of a constant expected fixture in a flawless room. The true goal of mature love is not to ensure that we never change, but to create the safe space where essential change, however painful, is possible. Be wary of the love that demands you stay exactly as you are. For sometimes, the greatest act of love is not relentless acceptance, but the courage to insist upon difficult, necessary growth. Conditional love, applied with wisdom and compassion, is often the very condition required for genuine happiness. When meaninglessness becomes a form of relief. We arrive now at Paradox 15, the strange comfort found when meaninglessness becomes a form of relief. Have you ever felt the weight lift? Not because you finally found the definitive answer to your existential quest, but because you finally admitted there might not be one. It is the moment the internal struggle ceases, replaced by a spacious, neutral silence. This is not the crushing despair often associated with nihilism. It is the quiet exhale that follows the cessation of required striving. We spend our lives building elaborate towers of purpose, a career trajectory, a perfect family, a lasting legacy. We fundamentally believe that meaning is the bedrock of happiness, and therefore, meaninglessness must be the ultimate definition of suffering. But what if we have entirely mislabeled the true source of the burden? This paradox suggests that the most intense suffering often stems not from the inherent absence of meaning in the cosmos, but from the exhausting, relentless, self-imposed requirement to continually create, prove, and sustain meaning in every single action. It is the terror of the blank page demanding an epic narrative, not the terror of the void itself. Relief is found in the simple, brutal acknowledgement. This doesn't have to mean anything more than what it is right now. Consider the famous example of Sisyphus. The classic image is one of endless, agonizing toil under divine judgment. But what if, after the 1,000th push of the boulder, Sisyphus ceased asking, "Why am I doing this?" and simply began to observe the stone, the incline, and the sweat on his brow? He stops needing the act to be heroic, tragic, or instructional. He merely is the force interacting with the mass. The profound relief is not in reaching the top. It is in realizing that the stone's descent is not a moral failure or a symbolic representation of a failed life, but merely gravity. The boulder becomes less a symbol of existential punishment and more a neutral object obeying the laws of physics. The mechanism here is the psychological shift from seeking transcendence to accepting immanence. When you demand that your life transcend the ordinary, when every choice must fit into a grand overarching narrative, you create a constant and unbearable tension between the messy, imperfect reality of the moment and the perfect ideal you are chasing. This chase is consuming. It prevents stillness. The paradox unlocks when you stop searching for the external validation, the grand capital M meaning, and realize the immense freedom inherent in the trivial. You were conditioned to expect meaninglessness to be a cold, terrifying void, but you find it is actually a spacious, neutral room where you are finally permitted to set down your heavy bags. The pressure to justify your very existence before some invisible cosmic auditor melts away, replaced by the simple, unstructured wonder of observation. In our hyper-documented, monetized, and perpetually optimized modern age, we are constantly curated. We are perpetually selling the meaning of our work, our passions, our relationships, and even our downtime. We fear silence and stillness because it implies a lack of significant, productive action. We feel guilty for wasting time because time must always be invested in purpose, leading to perpetual low-grade anxiety about utilization. But what if wasting time, defined as allowing an hour to simply exist, unlogged, unoptimized, and unassigned a goal, is the highest form of relief? When you consciously step off the treadmill of required significance, you reclaim sovereignty over your immediate experience. This quiet, internal surrender is not cynicism, nor is it resignation. It is profound psychological liberation. It is the deep, restorative breath you take when you realize that the cosmic weight you have been agonizingly carrying was entirely optional. When you accept that the universe does not require your personal narrative to fit neatly into an inspiring motivational poster, two crucial things happen. First, your failures cease to be searing indictments of your soul, becoming merely misaligned attempts in a neutral landscape. Second, the small, immediate moments of pure, unjustified joy, the sudden taste of ripe fruit, the unexpected kindness of a stranger, the perfect slant of light across a wall, gain immense texture precisely because they are temporary, unjustified, and deeply meaningless in the grand scheme. They don't need to lead anywhere. They just are. Happiness, when divorced from the tyranny of purpose, is often not the arrival at a profound, encompassing answer, but the quiet, delicious act of letting the question of why simply go unanswered. The deepest freedom is realizing that you don't have to matter to the vast, cold universe for this single, immediate, perfect moment to matter completely and profoundly to you. The exhaustion of always needing to be better. You carry this heavy, invisible expectation, the belief that your current self is only a draft, awaiting a superior mandatory revision. You achieved your goals, yes, you hit the metrics and closed the loops, but the victory tasted slightly bitter because you were already planning the next ascent. You found temporary relief in success, but never true rest. When do you get to just be? This is the central conflict of the paradox of perpetual optimization. It is the exhaustion inherent in always needing to be better. This is not healthy ambition. This is the anxious compulsion fueled by the modern measurement culture. We have fundamentally confused human potential with human obligation. The contemporary world subtly insists that your untapped capacity, your unread books, your unlaunched side hustle, your unmeditated minutes, is not a gift of possibility, but rather a debt you owe to your future self, payable immediately. We have philosophically shifted existence into a performance metric. We live our lives as if we were software, designed for continuous, mandatory upgrades. You successfully reach version 2.0, smoother, faster, and more efficient than before, but before you can even stabilize, the notification pops up. Version 3.0 beta is now available. Install immediately to avoid obsolescence and failure to scale. Your reward for completion is simply the immediate knowledge that the next, harder, more demanding task is already waiting for your attention. This relentless push ensures that your effort is never truly done, only paused under the shadow of improvement. The deepest struggle here is that we have equated the feeling of striving, a state of tension, forward motion, and measurable output, with the feeling of living, a state of presence, acceptance, and quiet internal stability. The striving machine never stops because the moment you define happiness, peace, or worthiness as the successful acquisition of a future state, you guarantee a baseline of unhappiness in the present one. The engine works flawlessly to maintain dissatisfaction, ensuring you always keep running toward an optimized horizon that by definition must perpetually recede. If you catch it, it ceases to be the horizon. Look around. Burnout is no longer a failure of stamina. It is often worn as a perverse status symbol, proof that you are diligently engaged in the necessary, relentless pursuit of better. We use productivity guilt as a moral compass. We are so focused on achieving escape velocity from our current lives that we forget to inhabit them. The guilt hits hardest precisely during those moments of genuine rest. Sunday afternoons, a quiet cup of coffee, staring blankly at the wall, when the shadow of the to-do list seems to grow enormous and mock your stillness. The underlying psychological cost is the wholesale erosion of contentment. We have learned to equate contentment with laziness, or worse, with intellectual and moral weakness. We internalize the ruthless voice of the ideal self, that demanding manager who never grants positive reviews, only offers critical feedback on inefficiency. This ideal self is a tyrant who confiscates the joy of accomplishment by immediately raising the standard the second the goal is met. You become addicted to the initial tension of the struggle and terrified of the stability that follows success. True stability, true psychological presence, only begins when you grant the current version of yourself radical permission to exist, fully, entirely, and without immediate need for patches, fixes, or improvements. It is the moment you realize that the most profound act of ambition is deciding what precisely you do not need to improve today. Perhaps the greatest paradox of the striving life is this: you cannot achieve genuine happiness until you allow yourself the deeply dangerous radical grace of being good enough right now. When you finally stop running toward the optimized you might find that the calm, complete version you desperately needed was already waiting here, patiently in the silence. The moment happiness becomes pure nostalgia. Have you ever paused mid-laughter, mid-sunset, or mid-embrace and felt a sudden, sharp clarity, a realization that this is the peak and it is already ending? It's a beautiful, devastating tremor that marks the beginning of the end of present bliss. We are discussing the phenomenon of retroactive bliss, the instant where the present moment of genuine happiness collapses into the historical archive of the mind. Happiness, by its very nature, demands immersion. To truly be happy is to lose yourself entirely in the experience, letting the flow dictate your rhythm. Yet, the deep, satisfying awareness of being happy, the philosophical validation of the moment, requires a necessary, subtle stepping back, an act of observation. So, this observation is the mechanism that converts raw experience into refined memory. It is the cost of cognitive recognition, the sacrifice of present immersion for future recollection. The instant you recognize happiness, you simultaneously introduce the awareness of its transience, thereby beginning the process of turning it into a past event, a pure nostalgia. Imagine holding a perfect, unbroken soap bubble shimmering with every possible color in the light. While you are fully focused on the iridescent hues, the fragility of its skin, and the impossibility of its existence, you are entirely in the moment. There is no thought of preservation. But the second you think, "This is the most perfect bubble I have ever seen. I must remember this," you introduce a cognitive observer, that observer's reflection. The micro-vibration of that recognition is the thing that causes the skin of the present to rupture. The happiness isn't truly known until it is broken, leaving you only with the residue of its beauty, the memory, the pure nostalgia. The underlying mechanism is the cognitive split between the experiencing self and the remembering self. The experiencing self is wholly absorbed, non-judgmental, living entirely in the immediate sensation. It doesn't analyze, it simply feels. But the moment of pure, recognized happiness is the triumph of the remembering self. It rushes forward, tags the experience with a mental note. Important, save this, this is significant. And in doing so, it lifts you out of the natural, non-judgmental flow. You cannot simultaneously be the river and observe the river's flow. When you label the experience happiness, you are essentially putting it behind glass, ready for display, but no longer capable of being touched or breathed in. This act of recognition is a radical act of preservation disguised as an act of presence. It's the instantaneous velocity shift. You stop moving forward with the joy and start moving backward into its documentation. The most beautiful moment of happiness is the moment you sign its death certificate, ensuring its eternal life as nostalgia. Think about trying to capture that perfect, fleeting moment on your phone. The impulse to immortalize the scene is immediate, but in that fractional shift from witnessing to recording, you are no longer truly participating in the reality of the sunset or the laughter. You have traded the organic, fleeting pleasure for the digital, repeatable relic. In the modern context, this paradox is amplified tenfold. We are constantly, preemptively remembering, curating our lives while we live them, terrified that if we don't designate something as happy right now, it will vanish unrecorded and therefore be wasted. But this designation is the vanishing act. What this reveals is the inherent tension in human consciousness. We crave permanence, but life and joy are defined entirely by flux. True happiness requires a surrender to impermanence, a willingness to let the bubble exist without the desperate need to name it or save it. The realization that joy is fading, while painful, is often what grants it its profound and essential meaning. The psychological burden we carry is this: we feel guilt or failure if we cannot hold on to happiness, when in reality, its value is often inversely proportional to its lifespan. The purity of nostalgia rests on the certainty that the moment is truly, irrevocably gone. You cannot create a useful, lasting memory of the present without instantly severing the lifeline to the present. The moment happiness becomes pure nostalgia is the moment you truly understand that you were happy. Perhaps the true art of living is learning to feel the rupture without immediately rushing to collect the shards. The happiest moments are the ones we didn't know we were having until they were already beautiful ghosts walking through the halls of our memory. The deepest connection, forged in total solitude. You spend your life running from silence, believing connection is the antidote to emptiness. But what if the greatest intimacy you can ever achieve, with yourself and with others, requires a temporary exile? What if the ability to deeply merge with another human soul is directly proportional to how fully you have faced the isolation of your own existence? This is the paradox of the deepest connection forged in total solitude. Solitude here isn't merely the absence of people, it is the absolute presence of self. It's the deliberate withdrawal from external expectation, the social performance, and the demanding noise of validation. This space is where the self is stripped bare, no longer defined by how well it fits into another's world. It is the necessary context for separating who you are from who you are expected to be. Only in the absolute zero point of connection can you find the authentic heat of your own core. Imagine you are an ocean vessel. When you sail constantly in the harbor, you are buffeted by other ships' wakes and the distracting lights of the shore. You never truly feel the integrity of your own hull. True solitude is the deep-sea dive. The pressure is immense, the light fades, and the external world vanishes entirely. It feels like danger, but it is necessary. Only in that silence, under that incredible weight, do you discover which parts of your structure are truly sound and which are merely superficial decoration meant for fair weather. When you finally surface, knowing your own true depth, you can connect without needing the other person to be your buoyancy device or your navigation system. The core mechanism of this paradox lies in understanding the nature of most human interaction. Much of what we call connection is, tragically, an attempt to escape fundamental loneliness, making the relationship transactional. We look for a mirror, a shield, or an anchor. This is not intimacy, it's strategic dependency. We are seeking partners to fill a void that only we have the key to. This inevitably leads to disappointment and clinging because no external source can solve an internal deficit. When you face the void alone, however, you stop running. You integrate the emptiness. You learn that you are whole, though sometimes lonely. When you return to the world, the dynamic shifts entirely. You are no longer seeking to fill a hole. You are choosing to share in abundance. You are not needing the other person to complete you. You are finally able to see them completely without imposing the impossible burden of your own unmet needs upon them. You become sovereign over your emotional landscape. In the modern era, this truth is tragically obscured. We rarely achieve true solitude. We mistake being physically alone for actual internal stillness. We carry the hum of the crowd in our pockets, perpetually refreshing our feeds, to ensure the external world is still confirming our existence. This constant, low-level engagement prevents the deep resonance required for self-discovery. We are perpetually engaged, yet perpetually unconnected from our center, resulting in a unique form of collective, connected isolation. We are too distracted by echoes to hear the sound of our own voice. Philosophically, this solitary journey redefines sovereignty. The willingness to suffer the silence transforms the fear of rejection into the peace of self-possession. You realize that your deepest happiness cannot be outsourced and your self-worth is non-negotiable. The fear that once kept you desperately clinging to fragile or unsuitable connections dissolves, replaced by a quiet, self-generated confidence. This is the ultimate gift of withdrawal. You stop being a beggar demanding crumbs and become a confident host, inviting others into a space you have fully furnished and learned to love. Go deep into the silence, and when you return, you will find that the only connection worth having is the one forged in the fire where you learn to stand utterly alone. Only the sovereign self can truly connect. Why certainty is the enemy of vitality. If the human mind craves one thing above all others, it is solid ground. We yearn to know the answer, to seal the deal, to declare, "This is it." We seek that final, unassailable piece of evidence that allows us to rest the analytical machinery. But what if that ceiling, that final definition, isn't the completion you seek, but the very moment life begins to ebb? Have you ever noticed how the moment a belief becomes absolutely unshakable, it simultaneously loses its power to inspire movement or change within you? Certainty, in its most profound philosophical sense, is the cessation of inquiry. It is the belief that the map is fully drawn, the destination reached, and the need for navigation abolished. We are programmed evolutionarily to prefer predictable outcomes. It saves energy and signals safety. But when we apply the survival mechanism to the realms of meaning, love, creativity, or personal potential, we introduce a static element into a fundamentally dynamic system. True vitality, the experience of being fully alive, is defined by its movement, its capacity for surprise, and its inherent vulnerability to the unknown. Certainty is a psychological anesthetic designed to soothe the anxiety of existence, but ultimately paralyzing the very muscles required for living. Consider the difference between a flowing river and an iced-over lake. The river is turbulent, messy, and wonderfully unpredictable. Its waters are constantly exchanging energy, eroding banks, carving new paths. This is vitality. It is continuous becoming. The lake, however, when absolute certainty, the freezing temperature, sets in, achieves perfect stillness. It is defined, predictable, and physically safe. You can walk across it without fear of sinking. But nothing is growing beneath that surface of certainty. The metabolism of the water slows to near zero. The life within it waits, dormant, preserved, but not living. We seek the ice for its safety, forgetting that the ice is merely water waiting for life to return, waiting for the necessary thaw of questioning and friction. The psychological trap is insidious. We chase certainty, hoping it will grant us freedom from pain. Instead, it only grants us freedom from growth. When you become certain about your partner, your career path, or even your own identity, you stop observing, you stop listening, and you stop innovating. You replace active curiosity with settled dogma. The relationship, once defined by immutable roles, stops evolving and starts decaying under the weight of expectation. The career once mastered becomes a monotonous cage. Certainty promises peace, but it delivers stagnation. Anxiety, the raw fuel of uncertainty, at least forces you to engage with reality, to be sharp, responsive, and innovative. Certainty dulls those crucial edges. The paradox reveals itself here. The only way to sustain vitality in your life is to commit to permanent uncertainty, the belief that you and everything around you is still subject to radical revision. Look at the current cultural landscape saturated with aggressive certainties. Political certainty, ideological certainty, moral certainty. These aren't indicators of strength. They are symptoms of profound fear. People cling to immovable beliefs, not because those beliefs are demonstrably true, but because letting go of them means stepping back into the chilling void of I don't know, where real discovery begins. If your life is beginning to feel heavy, rigid, or monotonous, check your psychological inventory. Where have you declared the investigation closed? The genuine philosophical shift required is the acceptance of radical tentativeness. This means embracing the potential of being wrong, not as a catastrophic failure, but as the single greatest opportunity for expansion. The vital self understands that it is an ongoing project, forever incomplete. The fear of uncertainty is ultimately the fear of impermanence, the fear of death. But if you achieve psychological certainty, you have achieved a kind of premature psychological death, a stasis imposed by the ego to protect itself from the dynamic flow of existence. To truly regain vitality, you must allow yourself to be destabilized. You must allow your foundational assumptions to be challenged, not as an attack, but as the refreshing surge of the unknown rushing back in. Stop building the fortress of definition around your life. Tear down the walls of what you absolutely know. True life is lived not in the safe enclosure of certainty, but but in the exhilarating, terrifying, and limitless expanse of maybe. The strange cruelty of unlimited choice. This paradox fundamentally argues that freedom, when maximized beyond human capacity to process, ceases to be a blessing and becomes a debilitating burden. Do you ever feel more constrained by sheer possibility than by actual limitation? Think about the mundane decisions, the anxiety of choosing a simple paint color from a wall of 500 near-identical shades, or the low-grade stress of choosing a dinner delivery option from an endless scroll of cuisines. You are scrolling through a landscape of unlimited potential, yet the underlying anxiety of missing the perfect one keeps you restless, agitated, and ultimately frozen. We have been deeply conditioned by the promise of progress, believing that happiness is directly proportional to the number of doors we can open. The fewer restrictions placed upon us, the higher our well-being should be. But what we often encounter is the weight of maximization. This is the psychological compulsion where we are not simply choosing, but trying to calculate the absolute optimal outcome in a field cluttered with variables. It is the shifting of the burden of success entirely onto your shoulders. If you are unhappy, it is because you failed to select the perfect life from the infinite shelf. Consider the classic illustration, updated for the modern era. Think about opening your streaming service at 11 p.m., ready to settle into a quiet evening. A decade ago, you might have had 3 movies available to rent, and you chose one. Tonight, you have 10,000 films instantly accessible. You spend 30 minutes browsing covers, reading synopses, diving into subgenres, feeling the rising pressure of the clock ticking down on your leisure time. By the time you finally commit to something, anything, a subtle, distinct fatigue has already set in. You haven't watched a single minute, yet you are already tired. That fatigue is the cost of abandoned alternatives, the hidden cognitive load of the 9,999 other things you rejected, all demanding validation. The mechanism of unlimited choice functions through 2 primary destructive pathways: paralysis and regret. First, paralysis. When the quality difference between option A and option B is negligible, the decision engine in your brain stalls. It sees no clear winner, so it minimizes risk by delaying the choice indefinitely, resulting in choosing nothing at all. You scroll until you fall asleep, or you abandon the search altogether. Second, and far more damaging, is intensified regret. When you finally choose A, you instantly begin mourning the potential utility of B and C. Because the choice set was so vast, you operate under the unshakable assumption that a superior option must have existed, and your failure to find it is a personal fault. This is why a simple, mediocre meal ordered from a menu of 4 items tastes better than an identical mediocre meal ordered from a menu of 40. The inevitable regret attached to the latter pollutes the flavor of the choice you actually made. We experience this choice overload in every consequential and trivial corner of life. We see it in dating apps offering millions of potential partners, leading not to connection, but to endless comparison and a profound reluctance to commit, always waiting for the algorithm to deliver the upgrade. The relentless desire for optimization entirely replaces the simpler, deeper desire for contentment. When everything is theoretically available, the quiet joy of discovery and the gratitude for what you have evaporates, replaced by the grating pressure of selection. The modern paradox is cruel. The more perfect the outcome could be, the less satisfied you ultimately are with the outcome that is. This unlimited choice weaponizes self-blame against the self. When options are scarce, a poor outcome is often attributed to external factors, to misfortune or fate. But when resources and options are infinite, a poor outcome is attributed entirely and unforgivingly to your own judgment, your failure to research, your own inability to see the best path. This elevates generalized anxiety and deepens depressive spirals. It is the expectation that you must be the perfect curator of your entire existence, or else you have failed at the simplest task of being alive. The true freedom is not found in the sheer quantity of doors available to you. It is found in the freedom from the obligation to maximize. It is found in the moment you realize that good enough is often just as valuable and infinitely more peaceful than the theoretical absolute best. True peace is found in having the wisdom to close 99 doors and the strength to walk confidently through the one you chose, without ever looking back, without ever wondering. Sleep is the ultimate restricted menu. Choose it now. The beauty visible only through the cracks of brokenness. Do you ever feel the desperate need to present a seamless life, polished and whole, fearing that one visible fracture might invalidate everything you are? Pause right now and feel the weight of that vigilance. Can we truly find peace or even deep, resonant beauty in the places we've been damaged? This is the paradox of the imperfect illumination. It posits that the truest, most profound, and most resilient form of beauty isn't found in pristine wholeness, but precisely in the fractures, the visible records of struggle and survival. We are conditioned by culture to equate wholeness with value and any break or scar with failure or reduced worth. But the deeper psychological truth is that depth, compassion, and unique character are forged in the fire of breaking. The flawless surfaces we desperately try to maintain offer no pathway for light, and certainly no purchase for genuine connection. It is the history, the scar tissue etched into the material of your being, that carries the true weight of meaning and the potential for transcendence. Imagine a perfect, unblemished ceramic vessel. It is beautiful, yes, functionally and aesthetically faultless. Now, imagine that vessel shatters, perhaps through accident or immense internal pressure. Instead of discarding the pieces, they are painstakingly reassembled, not concealing the breaks, but highlighting them with molten gold lacquer, a process known as kintsugi. This repaired object is no longer just a vessel, it is a narrative. The gold doesn't erase the trauma. It immortalizes the endurance and the commitment to restoration. The value of this new, scarred form far exceeds the original. Why? Because the gold lines, the scars, are literal pathways for illumination. They demonstrate that profound beauty is not the absence of breaking, but the magnificent conscious choice to put the pieces back together, acknowledging the history of the journey. The core conflict arises because our ego demands perfection, viewing breakage and suffering as fundamental failure. We hide the cracks because we fear external judgment, rejection, and obsolescence. But in doing so, we trap our unique light inside. The psychic energy required to maintain the facade of flawless wholeness is immense, and it ultimately ensures you remain opaque, unrelatable, and inaccessible to others. The paradox radically deconstructs this universal lie. The broken place is never the weak place. It is the specific point of entry. It is the unique geometry of your vulnerability that finally allows others, and crucially your own deeper self, to see the genuine, enduring radiance beneath the surface tension. The deepest, most human empathy is never triggered by another's proclaimed perfection. It is triggered by shared, recognizable brokenness. Look around at the relentless pressure of modern life, the filtered feeds, and the cultural pursuit of the unattainable, zero-defect existence. We are living in a society terrified of acknowledging its own history, its own pain. But when you refuse to seal the cracks in your soul, when you stop trying to sand down the sharp, painful edges of your personal suffering and history, you create a profound human resonance. You fundamentally shift your relationship with past failures and traumas. They cease to be reasons for shame or withdrawal and become instead sources of unique resilience, depth, and defined character. This is not a call to wallow. It is a call to radical self-acceptance. It changes the internal monologue from, "I must conceal my flaws to be accepted," to, "My history is my unique geometry, and it defines my strength." It tells you, unequivocally, that your worth is not despite the challenges you have faced, but is profoundly interwoven with them. When you allow your brokenness to be visible, whether through vulnerability in conversation or acceptance of your own narrative, you give others implicit permission to stop hiding too. And the resulting shared truth is infinitely more beautiful, more complex, and more sustaining than any polished, illusionary facade. So, rest now. Let your vigilance soften. Stop exhausting yourself trying to seal the fissures and maintain a surface that was never meant to be immortal. Allow the light to pour in through the places you once thought were irreparable. Your truest, most enduring beauty is not in the material of the vase, but in the specific, shining, golden geometry of the shattering and the remaking. Those who arrive here understand more than words. Leave a word below that captures what you felt tonight, and share it with someone who still searches for meaning.